Chris started off the new year the way we all would at 3:15 in the morning with phones ringing about a ramming attack on Bourbon Street in New Orleans, and an incredibly complex investigation with a terrible body count in a city that relies on tourism and had a small football game coming up later that same day. So he dove right into that when he was at the headquarters branch of Counterterrorism. But most of his career, while he has been in and out of different responsibilities and disciplines, has been focused on counterterrorism, which is why he is the perfect person at the perfect time for the New York office, where the threat picture is like nothing else. Rebecca, who many of you know from past years here, is the Deputy Commissioner for Intelligence and Counterterrorism of the NYPD, which is just about the most awesome responsibility anyone could ever have when you consider that all roads lead to New York City when it comes to the threat, terrorism, and all of the issues that make New York the de facto capital of the world. So to begin our panel, as we say on CNN, let's start with the news. Approximately 40 minutes ago in Doha, multiple explosions rocked that city in Qatar. It is believed that that was an Israeli airstrike launched against Hamas leadership that was in Doha meeting yesterday to talk about a ceasefire with Israel and or the release of hostages. This clearly is a game changer in that picture. That is a larger story for a different discussion, but what I'd like to ask both of you about, starting with Rebecca, is that's 12,000 miles away on the other side of the planet Earth, and happened 45 minutes ago. What happens inside the NYPD's intelligence and counterterrorism operation when something like that occurs somewhere else?
So first of all, thank you again to everyone for having us. The magnetic pull of New York City is strong, and our sense of our jurisdiction is perhaps even stronger. So when things happen around the world, immediately, of course, we think what just happened around the world, but second part is, how is it going to impact our city and our security? We happen to have one of our international liaison posts who is in Doha. And so, of course, that's our first call, is to that officer to make sure that he and his family are okay. He has been in touch with everybody at the embassy, his counterparts over at the FBI and the other US footprint who are there. And then, of course, our 5 Ws. You know, immediately we start thinking about what are going to be the short, medium, and long-term impacts here. What sort of resources do we need to move around the city? So there's the understanding what happened, and then there's the immediate fortification of soft targets that we think would be vulnerable should anyone moved in one direction or another by what's happened decide to take it upon themselves. Or worse, obviously more unusually, but worse, be directed to do something here. So that means moving the hardening of targets officers, who we call our critical response command, heavy weapons armed and trained officers. You see a team posted outside this hotel, to relevant, in this case, religious, cultural, and diplomatic institutions around our city. It means making sure that our intelligence resources are looking harder than they normally do for any relevant tips, leads, following up on threats, but that we make New York City a little bit less hospitable to anyone who wants to do something here because of what's happening over there. And it's not just a now issue, so that's what we've done so far between the last 40 minutes and sitting here. on this stage. But then it's what is going to happen over the next days, what's going to happen over the next weeks. We're 2 days away from 9/11. We're on the eve of the UN General Assembly. You know, over the last 2 years, since October 7th, I think we have gotten quite adroit at titrating our resources based on these fluctuations in threats overseas, responsive to what's happening in the Middle East. We did it, you know, it's kind of amazing to think about. It's only been not even 12 weeks since Israeli strikes on Iran, US strikes on Iran. The pace of chaos is accelerating so quickly that we forget how much we've had to do this over the last 2 years and make sure that we are on our toes and keeping the city safe and keeping all of our resources and our officers safe overseas as well.
Chris Raia, what's going on in the FBI at the same time?
Well, first of all, again, like Rebecca said, thanks for having me. Just honored to be here and be part of the community and work with great people like Rebecca and the NYPD. A lot of the same stuff is going on through the FBI, right? So obviously, first and foremost is safety of our people and safety of our citizens. So those questions are being asked from our headquarters elements. Almost, I could tell you, happened as soon. I think we found out about this 2 hours ago. That first question is obviously asked: what's the safety of our people and U.S. citizens? And then, like Rebecca was saying, where there is just a mad rush for information at that point. The 5 W's: what happened? You know, who was it? Where was it? Kind of what those logical questions you would ask. And I would tell you, our offices, for as you don't know, we call them legal attaché offices. So those are essentially our representation from the FBI that sits in the embassies in 100-some countries all over the world, I think is the last number we had. But I would tell you, in this particular circumstance, based on reporting, you know, we're hearing that's Israeli strikes on Hamas leadership. That's not confidential. That's just what I read in the paper. So that's what we're hearing. So based on those things, we're really getting in touch with our office. We have an office in Doha, Qatar. So obviously we're getting in touch with our folks there. They are working with the locals, the foreign government, the host nation there, just trying to get as much information as possible, offering assistance, of course, should it be needed, any type of resources that we would need. But obviously, probably number one goal is getting the information. But not only our Doha office, our Ligat Tel Aviv office in this particular situation, we're getting in contact with them, right? We're talking to Mossad, we're talking to Shin Bet, we're talking to the Israeli government over there as much as we can find out about this attack, whether it was substantiated, is this what really happened, what's going on. And, you know, that's a push-pull as far as information goes, you know, in something like that. But really, once you get past that first, like Rebecca was saying, that first kind of wave of info, and you kind of have your feet under you on that, now you're starting to talk about those unintended consequences, those second, third order effects of what's going on, right? And then we work very closely. In fact, Rebecca and I were just talking, all right, how does this change UNGA? How about that third or fourth order effect? Like, how does this change our relationship with Qatar, right? Where we have a good relationship with Israel, have a good relationship with Qatar. Now we've got some type of geopolitical concerns going on now with both that, and then all that on the backdrop of 9/11 and then UNGA coming up. So a lot of those questions we're all asking, our various teams are asking, and we're trying to figure that out. So that was a great real current event to talk about today. So.
Well, and it's the nature of the beast. You know, I look around at this room and I see so many old friends and colleagues, and I see clearly the most relaxed, calm, serene person in the room is John Hart, the former chief of NYPD intelligence, who's recently retired, and saying, yeah, looks really busy over there. So let's talk about this field of endeavor and how it is evolving faster than we can really calculate. I was thinking about recent events, and you try to catalog them, and when do you go back? Do you go back to say, well, New Year's Day, we started off the year with a ISIS-inspired, lone wolf, highly capable, very complex terrorist attack. But then I look at just now, and you think of, okay, so like in late May in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, at the Jewish Museum, you have a private event, invitation only, an individual who is in Washington on a business trip, has come down from Chicago, has run as kind of the guy taking roll call, a corporate meeting like one that we're having in this room for a group of medical professionals, and then he pulls together a plot where he has already brought the weapons and the plan to go to that event that night and kill 2 employees of the Israeli embassy who happened to be engaged or about to be engaged in Israel, theoretically 2 weeks later. And you see that and you wonder, okay, this is in the name of Hamas. This is a guy we knew from the protest world. How does that happen? And while you're thinking about that, not 2 weeks go by before another individual, an Uber driver from Colorado, attacks a group of elderly marchers marching for the sake of Israeli hostages being held by Hamas in Boulder, Colorado. One of those burn victims dies. And then you don't get really too far away from that. You end up right in Rich Dancic territory in Minneapolis, where a guy dressed as a policeman showing up in a fake police car is banging on elected officials' doors at 3 o'clock in the morning, and when they answer, he opens fire on them and their families, and has a long list of targets. I mean, Chris and his people in the duty to warn had to call half of the prominent names in the United States and say, you were somewhere on one of these guys' multiple notebooks and lists. And then you get a couple of weeks away from that, and we're drifting from, May into June into July, and an individual who thinks he got headaches and disoriented from playing high school football walks into 345 Park Avenue looking for the headquarters of the NFL, having driven from Las Vegas, and opens fire with an AR-15 on innocent people in the lobby, killing a police officer and a number of civilians before finding his way up into the building, which causes one of the most massive police responses you could imagine in New York City, because this is what we have literally trained for since these attacks overseas. And to Joe Pfeiffer, who put together the fire department's counterterrorism program after 9/11, everything we practiced, everything we thought, will it actually work in real life the way it did? Your program came to life that day. Fire department firemen and EMTs and paramedics suited up with bulletproof vests and helmets and went in with NYPD, SRG, and CRC force protection to start to rescue those people who could be triaged and taken out even before the gunman was found or in custody. And then, you move on from that to a Minneapolis school shooting 2 weeks ago, and you have to ask, right, we're not going that far back. That's May, June, July, August, into September. Is this a spate of things that came in a flurry, or has this thing that we used to see once a month that now seems to be unfolding every 2 weeks, is this the new normal?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll start that one, and I'll let you clean it up, because she's much more polished than I am, in case you haven't figured it out. I tend to say what's on my mind, and I look over at my media rep over there to make sure I'm not saying anything wrong. But I think, look, at the risk of sounding doom and gloom,
she wanted to know what side you were sitting on. And I said, well, he's going to be in the middle. She said, but I need him to see the hand signals.
That's right. So I'm cutely watching her right now. Look, I think, like John's saying, the last 10 years I've been primarily national security. I've worked primarily national security. And I will tell you that I can't remember a time, and the professionals I work with, I cannot remember a time when all threats were elevated at the same time. I mean, I think there was a concerning time, I say that it's all concerning times, but there was a very concerning time in like 2014, 2015 with the rise of ISIS and the establishment of the caliphate and everything else. That was very concerning for a variety of different reasons. And then we kind of got that under control somewhat. But really, and I always go back to October 7th. October 7th, for whatever reason, well, there's a lot of different reasons, but I think it galvanized a lot of these groups. And then if you take, there's ISIS. ISIS is an issue. Obviously, ISIS has always been an issue. Al-Qaeda, a name we haven't heard about or talked a lot about in the last, 10 years. They're a thing now. They're still around. They're starting to reconstitute. Obviously, you've got state-sponsored terrorism with the Iranians. That continues to be an issue. We have Hamas now an issue, whereas before traditionally Hamas for the FBI and I'm sure for NYPD been largely financial investigations, money going overseas, not the sexiest of cases in the world, but still work them. But now we've got Hamas actors here, as John alluded to, people that we call them Hamas inspired to do attacks over here. So that's something we haven't had to deal with normally that we're having to deal with now. Then you flip over to the DT side of things, where we've got actors that are motivated by social circumstances. They're motivated by, whatever's going on in the government. They're motivated by race. And then on top of all of that, you throw the mental health epidemic that we're seeing across the country and across the world. And so all of that requires, I think what you're seeing, what you just talked about, John, you're seeing all those things starting to converge on one thing. Because everything you just mentioned right now, every attack you just talked about just now has bits and pieces of everything, I just talked about with those ideologies. We are seeing holistically, and I can't think of a better word, almost like a rogues gallery of ideologies out there where some people may start ISIS and then they flipped over to say 764, and I could talk to you for hours about 764. If you haven't heard about this new DT group called 764, research it, get to know what it is, because it's affecting our kids, it's affecting our citizens, and it's something we need to be acutely aware of as parents and as children here. But all that to say, the cross ideological issues that we're having now, where you've got again a person starting off as ISIS, moving over to Al-Qaeda, and then maybe moving over to some sort of grievance against the government they might have, and then there's probably some aspect of mental health in there. And so I think you're seeing that with all these attacks right now, and it's just requiring us, along I'm sure with the NYPD, we just have to be extremely agile, extremely nimble, and it really has been for the last year, like we are just going from one crisis to another crisis. And it's been obviously challenging for a lot of us, challenging emotionally, challenging resources-wise, challenging to obviously disrupt and mitigate. But I will tell you here, I think the bit of good news here, at least in New York, and I think I have a unique perspective on this as someone who is from the outside of New York. Obviously, I haven't spent, for those who don't know, I've just been here for 6 months. I haven't spent a day in New York in my 22, almost 23 years as an FBI agent. So I have a pretty unique perspective here. And I will tell you, based on my 22, 23 years, in various field offices in the FBI, to include a couple stints at headquarters, I cannot tell you how strong the federal, state, and local relationships are here. It is the best that I have ever seen in the Bureau. Our relationship with NYPD, our relationship with the rest of the federal, state, and local partners here, it is seamless. It is strong. It is robust. Yes, we do have difficult conversations at times, but we always keep the end goal in mind. And I will tell you that, in my opinion, is one of the strongest things that's going to combat that, and one of the biggest reasons that we're able to to not necessarily stay ahead of these things, because it's hard to stay ahead of these things, but to at least get those strong responses very quickly and limit any type of collateral damage. And that's something that I don't know that a lot of other communities have, and a lot of other big cities have, at least as strong as we have here in New York. So,
I think that is the most important solace that we can provide to a world of chaos that is absolutely the new normal. I mean, I was trying to list out, at this point, I have to write them down, and it's taken almost 20 years into doing this work, and I just have forgotten what's happened over just a few months because there's been so many. And I think, some of them are clear-cut. We can all agree that when a team of trained assailants walks into a concert hall in Moscow and uses automatic weapons and fire as a weapon to kill 143 people in the name of ISIS, that's terrorism. And New Year's Day, Bourbon Street, an Ford F-150 with an ISIS flag around the tailpipe, vehicle ramming incident, IEDs, terrorism. But we're at this kind of existential moment in thinking about what terrorism is, because these incidents are certainly using the tactics that we all know. We've had more vehicle ramming incidents in the West in the last 9 months than I can remember in several years before, starting off with the Christmas market in Germany, where you had 300 people injured and 6 killed. There's been 4 different vehicle ramming incidents in Germany. You go to New Orleans, you go to Vancouver, ideologically unmoored incident, horrible incident targeting a Filipino heritage parade there. Fire as a weapon, arson attack against Josh Shapiro's house. The Tesla Cybertruck incident that also happened on New Year's Day, fire as an ambush tactic in Coeur d'Alene over the summer for firefighters. These are incidents that are hard to pin down. The nihilistic extremist movement that 764 is a part of, that's at the root of 2 different school shootings right around January 1st, one in Wisconsin and a related one in Nashville, Tennessee, which leads you in your dotted line toward Minneapolis, and young kids that are motivated by an ideology of non-ideology. I mean, nihilism classically is the absence of any political goal, the absence of any coherent framework for an idea. Just burn the system down. And then these grievance-fueled guys, 345 Park Avenue is one signature example. Somebody thinks that they need their brain to be studied for evidence of CTE, and therefore find it appropriate to drive across the country and murder 4 people in cold blood. Back to December with Mangione and the assassination on our streets in Midtown of a healthcare worker. Right after that, this CDC attack. And so what is that? Is that terrorism when you take out corporate leaders in the name of a grievance that is personal but also larger and political? Is it clear-cut? Is our response now counterterrorism to all of these targeted acts of violence? For the NYPD, it doesn't matter. We are looking to prevent any act of targeted violence, and for the FBI, that is true as well. But there's a whole pool of resources and a way of understanding and marshaling the intelligence community and marshaling our partners when we are countering terrorism. But what is terrorism in 2025? We are really grappling with that. And we are grappling with moving from what's going to be the response around the world to war in the Middle East and all of its permutations 2 years on, what's going to be the response to the contagion effect, because really that's what we're seeing. This is about contagion. These are viral moments captured and disseminated broadly on social media and approved of unapologetically and plentifully on social media. We saw that after Mangione. The internet erupts in widespread support of a murder. Same thing after 345 Park, same thing after the CDC. So the influencer culture influence of our violence ecosystem has made it much faster and much harder to anticipate. How are we going to predict the guy who decides to leave his house in Vegas, drive across the country, and carry out this set of murders in Midtown Manhattan? So all the tripwires that work quite well when we're thinking about Al-Qaeda, ISIS, IRGC, really have to be tuned in a different way when we're talking about the nihilism of a young teenager who has mutually exclusive and a multiplicity of references painted on the guns that they're using to target a bunch of school children at a church. So that's something that's been slowly changing. And then I agree with you totally, Chris, October 7th, since then, it just seems like the axis is tilted and we're now just in it all the time, which of course, you're absolutely right, brings us back to our partnerships and how incredibly important they are. And you know, not just the government working together, which we do. We really are one big family, and I said it earlier this morning at the outset, but working more with private sector partners. You know, if it's not gonna come up on somebody's intelligence channels, then we're gonna all have to make sure that that last perimeter of defense is as strong as it can be without turning our society into a military zone. So it's hard. The work has become harder and more muddy. That's my main conclusion.
So now you know why this panel is called Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. It's where we live right now. But also, you know, we come out of the voices of 9/11, which, because of everything you just described, became voices. It's the reason that we do this conference, you know, that Frank and Mary put together, but with Sue, because you know, the victimology comes with every version of everything you just talked about. But what brings us here and has allowed us to grow happened next door, and that was 9/11. So I'd like to get a quick assessment from both of you on, as we skip to this much more broad picture, to go back to the micro on where is Al-Qaeda and where is ISIS right now? We tend to leap from one of these disasters to another in rapid succession. I think it's time to take a look back and say, are they gone? Are they defeated? Are they bowed but not unbroken? Where are we?
So bowed but not unbroken. I mean, look, it is, I talked about Moscow, which was not very long ago, although it seems in the very distant past. We not so long ago had a group of individuals who came across our southern border, very concerning network of individuals, Tajik mostly in background, who were disrupted in our city, in Philadelphia and Los Angeles, networks that were very potent in Europe, that were disrupted, really concerning footprint of activity that is happening in the Syria area. Still, you know, despite that also seems like a really long time ago that Bashar al-Assad's regime has fallen. And at the UN this year, you're going to have a new leader of Syria, who many of us know well, from the counterterrorism world. So still a huge footprint to be concerned around. What's happening in Africa, you know, there's the movement of resources and Al-Qaeda linked network as well as ISIS linked networks all over Africa. I find it quite significant that you've had multiple individuals disrupted from this country looking to go to Somalia to join ISIS, looking to travel to Africa to allegedly become foreign fighters. So the impact of Africa and all of its networks there on our threat environment here is considerable. These are pernicious networks that may shrink, and they will certainly keep growing. And we absolutely cannot take our eyes off of any of them. I think we're in a period of some degree of flux in the positive direction, unfortunately, for both of these groups and their activities. You see a convergence, and Chris mentioned this earlier, of in the ISIS-inspired world, which now has become the Hamas-inspired, which is now also becoming the Shia-inspired, IRGC-inspired individuals here in the West. That source of inspiration and concern about the conflict in Gaza, wellspring of support for extremism, which we're seeing in really unlikely places pop up in the West. So I think our outlook is pretty bleak on the future as it relates to ISIS networks and Al-Qaeda networks, both in the Middle East and much more broadly, and among the homegrown violent extremist population.
So Chris, that takes us from ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and Rebecca touched on the axis of resistance on Iran. In the last couple of years, Iran has changed shape in terms of its threat to the United States on U.S. soil and its threat to New York. How?
Yeah, I would even say the last couple of years. I would say probably the big paradigm shift with how Iran viewed us probably happened about 10 or 11 years ago. And the reason I know that is because I was a case agent on the very first lethal plot here on U.S. soil. It was a subject by the name of Mansour Ababsyar, and I won't bore you all with the details right now.
That was my favorite restaurant.
That's right. Yeah, that whole thing we thought about in a bar over a couple beers, me and the DEA agent. We said, where's this restaurant where they would go and everything else? So that was thought of by the government, not by them, through our informant. But I would say this, this happened around 2011, and before then, the way the government viewed Iran was they're not that big a deal. In fact, the FBI, the 2011-2010 timeframe, was getting told to close all of our Iranian cases and direct it more towards ISIS, Al-Qaeda, kind of the bigger players in that sphere at that time. And then this first lethal plotting event comes up. And it was met with a lot of resistance at the time, obviously from people, because that was completely 180 degrees different than what Intel had suggested.
It made no sense.
It made no sense, absolutely. In fact, I got laughed out of the deputy assistant director's room when we talked about this case, which was predicated essentially on a drug source that myself and my DEA partner were running. Which I hadn't worked any terrorism back then at the time, but so we start to see this lethal plotting, and that really was really the trigger to a bunch of lethal plotting attempts, some successful, not only here in the U.S. but kind of around the country by the Iranian regime. And then that has just continued to progress through the years. I mean, we're no stranger to it here in New York. I'm sure most of you know or at least read about the two lethal plots that we disrupted along with our partners at NYPD and other federal, state, and local partners just here in New York. One against a very outspoken critic of the regime, Masih Alinejad. Actually, both of them were related to Masih Alinejad in trying to obviously trying to silence her for good, but also as part of both those investigations, they're targeting very significant political figures, very significant critics of the regime, to include our president. And so, look, I'm here to tell you, someone who has read all the reporting, has worked the case from a case agent point of view, has read all the reporting, and was in charge of all counterterrorism operations in the world. That is not an investigative theory that the government of Iran is doing that. These are not rogue agents who are going out on their own. These are 100% planned, coordinated, facilitated, done by the government of Iran. And not only the government of Iran, senior members of the government of Iran. And they may have their hands full right now with things that are going on overseas, but rest assured, they have a very, very long memory, much longer than our memory here. I'll tell you that for sure. And it's only a matter of time before that continues to ramp up again. And I think we're starting to see that ramp up again after all the kind of the chaos that's been going on overseas. But that, if you ask me, I think outside of the kind of lone offender, which keeps me up at night, the government of Iran keeps me up probably the most at night, just based on they have the motivation to do it, they have the skill to do it, they have the resource and they have the funding to do it, and they've tried it a bunch of times and they've gotten really close.
It's such an interesting, I didn't know, this is news, breaking news to me. I didn't know you were the case agent on that case, because I was at the NIC during that whole, it was, to me, fascinating, because, you know, the one thing that you can never do is just assume that because the behavior of your adversary has been constant, it'll stay constant, and so therefore it's not, it will never happen, and that's crazy.
Just to frame this, because I think Chris raced by it, this comes in as information that he develops with a source with the DEA agent. I cannot describe to you the amount of high regard in the FBI's counterterrorism apparatus it is when the DEA comes in with information from a drug source about a terrorist plot, so I won't. But
Did you ever think about working for us? You know a lot about the FBI, John.
I had just left the Bureau at the time this case started, and it was the Iranian government has recruited agents on the ground from Los Zeros, the drug cartel in Mexico, to come to Washington and assassinate the Saudi ambassador by shooting him up at their security, so maybe just blowing him up in a crowded Georgetown restaurant. And in the communications, when they said there will be collateral damage, the guy said, F him, we just want the guy taken out. And everybody who knew anything about terrorism, Iran, or assassination said, get the out of here.
No way.
And they said, if it's real, show us the money. So they said, well, we'll give you $500,000 to do it. Here's $250,000, which showed up in an account that traced right back to the IRGC and intelligence channels. And everybody said, oh my God, this is real. But that's a decade ago. Rebecca, just give us a minute on the Alina plots, because one was exotic and started out with a kidnap and a boat on the Brooklyn waterfront in the middle of the night, and the other ended on my last day in the NYPD with a car stop with a guy with a machine gun.
That was your last day?
Yeah.
Gosh.
I was packing up my office. John Hart says, we just stopped a guy with a machine gun at Mossy's house.
That's right. This is an incredible story about how boots on the ground, detective work, FBI special agent work, mixed with all of the sort of highfalutin intel resources and tools end up, and then the third wave is the arrest of two individuals, one in Staten Island and one in Brooklyn, also casing for the same dissident, which shows you a couple things. One is they are not stopping, right? 4 years of attempted desired retribution for the killing of Qasem Soleimani, and that's before you get to what's happened over the last several months. So, we are certainly in it for the medium and long term. And employing these very colorful cutouts. I had never heard of Thieves in Law, which was the Azerbaijani organized criminal group that was employed by the Iranian government in the second plot to help carry out this attempted assassination. So the employment of these cutouts for plausible deniability, which, by the way, is something that we're seeing now in a much more widespread context with transnational repression and threats and Russian sabotage in Europe. So bringing on organized crime, or maybe disorganized, maybe just lone criminals who are answering out an ad on Telegram to engage in either low or maybe higher level criminal activity, and not really knowing that the provider of your DoorDash-like job is actually a government, or maybe in sometimes knowing about it. And there's this whole chain of activity that leads you from Iran through Eastern Europe criminal syndicates to a Brooklyn street with a car full of rounds and an AK-47 and a bunch of cash. and geopolitics really hanging in the balance, right? U.S.-Iranian relationships. And so, challenging our sense of what's likely or what's possible is something we have to do every day. With our Bob CR, it was hell no, that's never going to happen. And then fast forward to today, and my God, we have to spend all this resources and time and energy making sure it doesn't. But October 7th itself, although certainly not unpredicted, not something that was on the horizon. And I think at this point, we now feel comfortable with none of our assessments that end in, oh, that's not going to ever happen, right? I think we all collectively can acknowledge that the surprising thing, the bottom falling out thing, could absolutely happen if we don't spend all our time and effort making sure it doesn't.
So let's talk about exactly that, and then we'll try and save the end of this for questions from the audience. But making sure it doesn't. So we hear about these attacks, the litany we ran through, but we don't hear as much about the attack that never happened because it never happened. That's where the bulk of your work and time goes. Tell us about preventions here in New York.
Well, I think for me, look, I tell my terrorism investigators all the time, it's a thankless job because 95% of what we do on the CT side, on the counterterrorism side, is nothing. It turns out to be nothing. We are trying to prove a negative, right? We have this thing called the Constitution, right? That we have a First Amendment right. And so the majority of the stuff that we end up proving is a lot of times First Amendment. So what we do, plain as simple as I can put this to the crowd here, in our counterterrorism investigation, it's very simple when you boil it down. We look for people that have a lot of intent and a little bit of capability. Those are the people we look for, and those are the people we sink the majority of our big cases, or we put a lot of our big cases on. We look for those people. There's a lot of people out there that have a lot of intent, that have no capability. And there's even people out there that have a lot of capability and no intent. We run all those things to ground, but we are looking for the person that has intent and capability. And thankfully, it's a very small portion. But I tell people, it's not even like, I tell my investigators, it's not even like finding a needle in a haystack. It's like finding a needle in a stack of needles. That's how rare it is. And I'll give you another example on how we treat things on the counterterrorism side in the FBI as compared to maybe, say, the criminal side. So I've got, obviously, some of you, probably a lot of you know Rob Hussein, who's over counterterrorism. He's over our counterterrorism division. Leslie Bakshi's is over our criminal division, handles all our criminal stuff. So we could get a report from someone, concerned citizen, maybe an informant, hey, there is a guy I know dealing 10 kilograms of cocaine out of 123 Main Street, blah, blah, blah. Will you guys do something about it? Leslie, on her side, on the criminal side, can basically say, nope, we're going to kick that to the local police department there. It's a little bit too small for us to get involved with. We don't have the resources, blah, 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 blah. Rob, on the counterterrorism side, does not, nor should he, have that luxury. So every single tip that comes in on the counterterrorism side, as long as it has some sort of amplifying information or some sort of information we can go with, for example, suspicious person that looked like he was casing One World Trade, and the last 3 digits of the license plate was 345. As long as we have some information, every single one of those leads gets run to ground through our JTTF and again with our NYPD partners. No matter how innocuous it sounds, no matter how crazy it sounds, and we don't call these people on the phone to interview them, we go out there and we interview them and we conduct a logical interview of these people. The great news is for us, 9 times out of 10 or even 9.5 times out of 10, it turns out to be nothing. And so I say all that because I think that's the first step to prevention, and what we need to continue to do is every single tip that comes in continues to get followed through on and gets followed through on as thoroughly and as aggressively as possible within the bounds of the Constitution, within the bounds of our own policies. But 99%, my drug guys, everybody, they sees 100 kilos at the border, everybody's high-fiving everybody, saying great, great job, everything. The only time you hear about my counterterrorism guys is when something goes bang. right? And so you all don't hear, or the majority of the public does not hear about literally the hundreds of cases the FBI across the country this year disrupted, or NYPD disrupted. It just doesn't make the news because we don't let it get that far. And so I think that's a pretty big distinction, at least for us, when we're trying to prevent. And then the one final thing I will say on prevention before I lose a thought, and Rebecca mentioned it earlier, probably the space that we have grown the most in the 22 years that I've been in as a bureau is in our private sector engagement. The old see something, say something campaign, like I can't tell you, that is very, very cliche, but I can't tell you how important it is. What I don't think what a lot of people don't realize is some of the biggest cases in the FBI didn't come from a supercomputer, didn't come from a highly placed CHS. It came from private citizens. They were predicated from private citizens that worked for private corporations. And so expanding our relationship in our private sector, it's been one of my priorities since I got to the New York office 6 months ago. We are pushing a lot of resources into our private sector engagement because for years and years and years, we just didn't have those. We didn't have those relationships. In fact, some of the stuff I share with the private sector now, quite frankly, 10 years ago I would have gotten fired. But my mantra since being here has been, we are going to share until it hurts with the private sector, because those are the folks that are our eyes and ears out there. I think largely since 9/11, we've got it right with we being the FBI, we've gotten it right with our law enforcement relationships. I think we've done a good job, at least for the FBI, making those relationships work where traditionally maybe we hadn't prior to 9/11, where I think we still have space to grow, and which I think is going to be a huge, huge help in being proactive and deterring these things in the future is with our private sector.
Well, and one of the co-sponsors of this event with Voices and Invictum is the NYPD SHIELD program, which is, the NYPD's biggest private sector outreach in the counterterrorism field. But Rebecca, when we talk about these preventions, and I think Chris did a very good job of framing the process, which there is no lead that we get to throw away, no matter how absurd it may sound when it comes in. I think of a guy driving into the Lincoln Tunnel on his way to attack a synagogue, a guy stepping onto a plane in Canada on his way to attack New York, a person coming out a doorway who's got a rooftop full of IEDs in Soho. Those things we never hear about.
No, sometimes we hear just a little bit about them, and that's obviously your fault now.
Yes.
And all of you in the audience who are responsible for, and many of our media colleagues here, I think, do an excellent job of highlighting the successes and the dogs that didn't bark. You've named a couple really good cases, and I'll just add to the mix. Inoculation, I talked earlier about contagion. And the flip side of it is making sure that the public is aware of dangers and risks, and also promoting the disruptions that we can publicly. And the 764 network and larger comm network has some really important examples and data points around successful arrests of individuals who are engaging in a pattern of some of the more heinous activity that, as a parent, as a counterterrorism practitioner, I can imagine, targeting, grooming young kids to engage in escalating patterns of self-harm and harm to others, ranging from mutilating pets and cutting on themselves to live streaming their suicides to school shootings. Those disruptions of individuals in that network around the world that are carried out by the FBI through the JTTF with the help from a broad number of partners, and the education of the public, of parents, of school officials, of local law enforcement across the country, of what signs to look for, are among the most important sets of work that we collectively have been engaging in over the last year and a half. And I think, coming into this in the post 9/11 context, would you ever have imagined how much of your day would be spent contending with the Discord and TikTok and Telegram profiles of young teenagers and children? Absolutely not. But that's the current threat, and it's definitely the next generation of threat. So that work, which is less well understood and less talked about, incredibly important for all of us to be engaged in collectively. So look for the arrests associated with, and there's a number of them, the 764 NCOM, nihilistic violent extremists network. Look for some of the intel production that the practitioners in this room are putting out on these topics as much publicly as possible. So NYPD, because we're unfettered by working in a classified arena much of the time, can put out a lot of information publicly through SHIELD, through other networks. That's important for everybody to understand and read so that you can be the next private sector partner or concerned citizen who calls in leads to our hotline. We had over 600 school leads last year, school threats. That's a large number. We, of course, investigate each one of them. Some of them lead us to thwarting a kind of Minneapolis school shooting scenario. Some of them lead us to mental health treatment for kids who need it. Some of them lead us down totally other paths. So our leads team's incredibly busy doing a wide range of activity, but it gets us very squarely into the space of supporting victims and families that we're here at this conference doing.
All right, so we've got 10 minutes. I gave you fair warning. Questions from the audience? All right, so we got one right there. Live from Australia.
Not dead from Australia.
No.
My name's Carolyn O'Hare. I was a police officer in Sydney, Australia for 42 years, 30 years in counterterrorism, and since retiring, I set up Victims of Terrorism Australia. So just in terms of the threats you have from the Shia IRGC Iranian side of the house, as compared to the Sunni AQIS side of the house, very different types of capability. How do you deal with those different types of capabilities, the Shia being more sort of under the radar, popping up every now and again and then going back under the radar, not wanting to be necessarily identified, as opposed to AQ ISIS, like we're here, look at us, what have we done? That must present a lot of challenges for you in terms of very different types of tactics used. And I'm just wondering how you deal with those two different types of tactics from those two different, very different types of threat.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I think
A lot of it's about the cutouts, right?
it's about the cutouts too, but I would say the Shia threat, the Iranian threat, and I'll just put it like this, and you all know where I'm going with. We rely more on our sophisticated techniques when it relates to that threat. And I would say we rely more. One of the big things with ISIS particularly, and I think Rebecca would agree with this, they've gone from a very centralized model in ISIS to a very decentralized model where they've got different regions and everything else. And I don't know, they're kind of like the government, right? I don't know if the left hand talks to the right hand a lot. Sometimes they kind of do their own thing and operate in silos, which I think if they would get their stuff together, they'd be much more effective, but don't tell them I told you that, just because they seem to be disjointed at times. Those provide, and they do a lot of their recruiting via the internet, right, in these chat rooms and everything else. And so with that specific threat, we're kind of able to use CHS, what we call confidential human sources, online human sources. We're able to infiltrate those chat rooms at times. And that technique, at least for us, tends to be more prevalent in the ISIS, maybe even the Al-Qaeda side. Al-Qaeda, we probably do a blending of both, where we rely on our sophisticated techniques and then use more CHSs on Al-Qaeda as they kind of reconstitute here. But everything gets tougher, and I think Rebecca mentioned everything gets tougher with what we call lawful access or the dark net, right? I mean, we're still, we're getting better in the space, but we're still not there as far as, getting subpoena returns back from some of these servers that are overseas. Some of them, they just won't give them to us, and some of them just don't collect the data, right? And so that continues, that continues to be a challenge for us.
All right, lightning round for you guys. How many SHIELD members in the room? Okay, so that's a good count, could be more. How many people here have kids? More than SHIELD members. How many people in here know all about 764? And how many people don't and would like to know?
Everyone should raise their hand.
All right, so Rebecca, you got 5 minutes and 28 seconds. I think half the room needs to know what it is we've been talking about.
So I described it in very broad brushstrokes. The key point is that children are often being recruited in the most vulnerable of places. LGBTQ forums, eating disorder forums, suicide forums, kids who are expressing concerns, needing help, finding some of that help online, gaming platforms, and being sought out and deliberately and very assiduously groomed, sometimes by other kids. Sometimes the victims become the perpetrators. Sometimes the perpetrators are adults. When kids try to disengage or families try to disengage their kids from this behavior, and the radicalization is very quick. In some cases, it's 2 weeks, right? Really important for parents to understand the withdrawal, the cutting, the spending time online in a way that feels different. When they try to disengage, they are threatened, they are doxxed, they are swatted, blackmailed, bricks thrown through windows, all in an effort to make kids spend more time online. And what they're seeing online is the worse the better. Videos of a wide range of horrible things, self-immolations and beheadings and cartel violence and ISIS violence and school shooting veneration. And it is a cesspool of hate and violence and vitriol that is accompanied by increasing demands of the kids to engage in this pattern of behavior. So it sounds like the stuff of nightmares, and it really is, and it's widespread. Thousands of cases around the world of this happening. So we've written some on it. I see some of our analysts in the back of the room who've done some really great finished intel production that's available via SHIELD on this topic. The police commissioner and I wrote an op-ed in the New York Post a few months ago. The UK has done a great job warning. The FBI has done a fantastic job investigating and bringing this to justice, but also warning about this threat. So I think that the stuff is out there, and every few days, it seems, we see more in media accounts of these kids who, many of them are success stories. They're kids who have been pulled out of the abyss. Some of them tragically are not. And now increasingly there's an overlay of technology on all of this, not just the technology where these kids are found, but the impact of AI and radicalization and also preying on kids who are asking questions of chat box that's leading them to, in some cases, suicides. So the internet is an often really dark place for our kids and needs to be policed accordingly, and a place where you can have access to any kind of violence, any kind of ideology you want. Going back to your really good question, one of the things that we're seeing since October 7th is the influence not just of Al-Qaeda ISIS ideology, but I think about, and this was before October 7th, the attack on Salman Rushdie as a really interesting example of Hezbollah-inflected, IRGC-inflected, homegrown, influenced attack. We see a lot more of that in our cases as it relates to any symbol of anti-establishment, anti-government, pro-violence, no matter what it's grounded in. So Get rid of the internet and the world would be a much safer place.
Yes. Well, I mean, in our survey of the room, and, you know, we've got the pros in here, half the people knew about that, half the people didn't. So I think we close with a public service with your detailed explanation. It's not counterterrorism, but it is in the threat picture that we all face, especially with kids, and I think more so for our streaming audience, because I bet the ratio was lower out there. So we are very lucky. We're very lucky as a city like New York to have the resources to devote more resources to the counterterrorism threat than any other city on the planet in terms of not just money, but also in terms of personnel. We are also very lucky to have Christopher Raia as the ADIC in the New York office with all of his experience and clearly, as we learned today, his incredible dedication, and Rebecca Weiner at the NYPD, and how that hand in glove fits together every minute of every day of every year for everything, everywhere, all at once. Let's thank our panel.
People have to realize the dedication, the expertise, and knowledge that they have and the work that they do. And that's what's not getting out there, you know, about and the growing landscape of, you know, how things have grown and expanded and the current threat from where we were on 9/11. So, you know, I came up after, I guess Joe was speaking, I was thinking, we talk about the victim-centered approach, but how about the responder-centered approach? And what do these people need in their own organizations to deal with these kinds of responsibilities every day? And, you know, I'm so grateful for the work that you do. It's very reassuring being here in New York that we have the expertise in all of these agencies and that they're working together. I wanted to mention, Chris, I'm in the FBI Citizens Academy, and it's a funny story. I'll tell you later how I ended up in the academy. But at any rate, that's another way that citizens can become involved. And the training that they did in those briefings over the course of a month or two were extremely helpful and really reinforced the work.